Шановні колеги, ми продовжуємо роботу.
Dear colleagues, we continue our work, and the topic of next briefing is 20 years of testing of competence of healthcare professionals in Ukraine. Oleksandr Linchevskyi, Deputy Minister of Healthcare of Ukraine, is one of the speakers. The other two speakers are Donald Melnyk, honorary President of the U.S. National Board of Medical Examiners, Iryna Bulakh, Director of Testing Center of the Ministry of Healthcare of Ukraine. Good afternoon. The changes, introduction to the healthcare system is not possible without changes in the system of education in the medical sphere. People treat people, not medicines, not equipment. The doctor is a key person in the process and in the system of healthcare, and his or her qualifications are key things for changes. Without high quality education of a doctor, we can't talk about changes in the healthcare system for better. An important component, and the most important maybe in the system of assessment of cost, evaluation of competence, not only of students, not only of graduates of medical universities, the system of tests of competence. We have adopted the decision and signed an agreement on intentions with the Center of Testing on future cooperation as the patients both in the USA and in Europe has the same diseases, and they are diagnosed by the same equipment and examined by the same equipment, and should be cured by the same methods. Ukrainian students should study according to the same curricula as the Yale University students, and he or she should pass the same tests as in Yale University, and the results of the exams should be not worse than in Yale University. Future cooperation between the National Board of Examiners and the Testing Center is the way to achieve this goal. Thank you. We are giving the floor to Mr. Melnyk.
Thank you. It's a real privilege to be here. My organization has, for the last 102 years, been involved in creating assessments for health professionals in the United States. There are a number of reasons why this is important, and one of the most common things that we hear is that, well, examinations are just examinations. They don't really mean anything. And so I'd like to begin by making the case that well-developed, high-quality examinations actually provide very important information. And the slide that is shown here is from a study published a little over 2 years ago. This study took a large cohort of doctors in Pennsylvania in the United States and compared their score, which is shown on the top of the graph, on the USMLE Step 2, the second component, the equivalent of CROC 2 in Ukraine. And so we see the group of students' scores represented across the top, and on the scale at the right, we see a measure of mortality from the patients of those same doctors from cardiovascular disease over a 10-year period. And you can see that starting with the score of about 178 or so, that was the low end of the scale, that was the baseline mortality. And the higher the score, the greater the reduction in mortality among the patients of those doctors from cardiovascular disease. And so you can see that in this particular distribution, the score increase of 20 points, a doctor who scored 20 points higher than another doctor, on average, the patients of that doctor would have 4% lower mortality from cardiovascular disease. And the point of sharing this is that well-designed examinations during the educational process can help us understand which doctors will be better and worse, which schools produce doctors who are better or worse, and can help us sort out the doctors at the bottom of the scale who present too high a risk to patients. So the value of these tests is not just about moving forward in the academic program, but rather to help us at the individual and the institutional level understand how well doctors are being prepared to provide important care that helps save patients' lives. So that's the foundation of the work we do. We believe that these tests used across medical schools, across the boundaries of states, and even across the boundaries of nations, help us understand how effectively our health system is preparing and producing physicians who will care effectively for patients. Many places use the evaluations within medical schools, within university, as the primary measure of how a student is performing. And I wanted to show you one more slide that helps understand why having a national common standard, a national measure through an examination is useful. Now, in the United States, we have a very strenuous system of accrediting medical schools. Many standards that must be met in order for a medical school to be open and have students. This is a sample of 25 randomly selected medical schools from among the approximately 160 medical schools in the United States. Putting all 160 on the graph would have made it difficult to interpret, so I asked our statisticians to do a random sample of 25 schools. And what it shows is the box plot shows the mean and the quartile distributions of students from each school. Now, these schools have all met the same standards of accreditation, but as you can see, the distribution of their students is very different. If you look on the right-hand side of the graph, you can see that the students are uniformly performing better than the lower part of the students on the left side of the graph. So we have schools that have both a wider distribution, that is, they have some good students, but quite a few not so good students, and other schools where the boundaries are closer. If one would put the pass-fail line across that graph, you would see that the last 8 or 10 schools in this sample had no students who failed the exam, while the ones on the far left had as many as a quarter of their students who were failing exactly the same examination, showing that they had mastered the knowledge and skills being measured by the exam considerably less well. And so information like this can be very informative to each school. If I were a school at the left end of this distribution, I would be asking the question, what do I need to do to be comparable to the schools on the right end? What can I do differently in the way I teach, in the way I select students, in the way I prepare students? Without a common examination, this graph would not be possible. Each school would have its own examinations, it would have its own student distribution, and there would be no way to measure effectiveness of schools or training programs of any sort without having this common national standard. So we believe that having a common national examination that is high quality, built effectively, gives very important information, first about the level of competency, the level of skill that contributes to good patient outcomes. That's the most important part. This just isn't a test that's part of a school tradition. This is real information that predicts patient outcome ultimately, and is incredibly useful in understanding the system. In any model where we wish to be continuously improving, where we want to make things better year over year, where we want to raise standards, where our aspiration is to always be improving the healthcare we provide to our people, then the only way to know that you're achieving that is to have measures like these that allow us to look across the continuum of education, across the many medical schools, across the regions of the country, and to understand from this information where we have work to do, which are the schools that are doing very well and what can they share with their colleague schools, with their sister institutions, in order to make the test, or in order to make the performance, the knowledge and skills measured by the test, rise to a higher standard. So we've been very pleased for many years now to be working with the testing board here in Ukraine and to sharing our experience of over a century in developing national examinations that provide this kind of assistance in improving the healthcare system.
Дякую вам. До слова запрошується пані Ірина Булах.
Iryna Bulakh has given the floor. Good afternoon. I would like to say that in April, March, we will have 25 years when in the framework of big project of USAID, the representatives of two countries, they visited for the first time in Philadelphia, National Medical Board, Attestation Board of Medical Examiners, and among the members of the delegation, I was present there, and my colleague Marina. And there were two countries this project covered in order to show how to train doctors in the period when the changes started in our countries. Two countries, these are Russia and Ukraine. And today we may say that in Ukraine those skills is realized at the level of the examination, and 20 years passed when the first agreement was concluded between the National Board of Medical Examiners and the Ministry of Health to create National Testing Center in Ukraine. In 1999 it was created, and now it actively works and introduces modern methods of standardized assessment in healthcare and quality assessment of medical professionals. And starting autumn this year, they initiated a big project, and the main idea of this project is to carry out research and to study the world practices, and there are projects at KIMS, PISA, and Ukraine actively participates in these projects. And medical education introduces best world standards, and these are the products that is developed by the National Board of Medical Examiners. And this is the I-formed test. This is the basics of medicine. And this will be on the 11th of May in Ukraine, and half of graduates will participate. Those medical professionals that are physicians and pediatric doctors, and what can be of help in this. So this is important for us. It will give us an opportunity, and it will give us a drive, new directions of development of the system, not only system of testing, because testing is based on classical methods and approaches that are described in the manuals on assessment, and it is being introduced now. What is difficult to introduce is the procedure of these testing. So there are the students should adhere to ethical local rules because we see it from the US experience that students in the course of these examinations, if they cheat, they cannot be doctors. And in Ukraine, it is difficult to introduce such practice, and introduction of such practices and procedure of these testing, that this will improve the quality, and it will allow to prevent those unfair people to have access to medical profession who are not qualified enough, or those who lack moral qualities. And also about comparative research. This will give us opportunity to change second component. This is the content of this licensing exam. And we, having the results of this comparative research, we will be able to find those weak and good sides that our graduates are going to demonstrate. And analyzing weaknesses, we will be able, together with our educational community, to introduce changes to the courses of training for medical professionals. And also, we have a long-term cooperation agreement that will allow us to introduce changes not only to the curricula of graduates, but also to a third year of study that is the basic disciplines, to the basic disciplines. And I hope that our fruitful cooperation will yield good results for the benefit of our country. And I would like to thank Donald Melnyk. This is a person we work with for 20 years. And his ancestors lived in Ukraine, and we feel that his heart is with us. And when we tell about the events that happen in Ukraine and what problems of this assessment we face, we always have his support, his helping hand, and not only his hand but also his heart. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear colleagues. Do you have questions or comments? Please. Good afternoon, Yemets Maria, UCMC. My question is to you all. So could you please tell us more about this testing, whether it is oral or written? If it is oral, whether it will be carried out by Ukrainian doctors or by foreign doctors and specialists, and maybe what are the preventive mechanisms in order to prevent some fraud or some cheating? So this is in the form that it is in the United States, and it will be in writing. And in the US, they prepared a standard examination booklet, 160 questions. These are questions from American standard exam, and BME prepares examination books for Ukraine, and they will be provided to testing center in Ukraine, and then the center of testing through special methodology, they will be brought to higher educational institutions. The exam will be throughout Ukraine for the medical graduates of medical institutions. So we would like to have objective results, and we work on this. And the testing center provided guarantee to National Board of Medical Examiners that I am, as a director of the center, and directors who provide training for students, we guarantee that all will be done fairly and objectively. We hope for this. One more comment. What is the number of people who will take this exam? This is 3,000 out of 3,000 out of 6. Do you have other questions? Please ask.
I have a specifying question. Is this a pilot project? Such projects, they are pilot in their essence. The thing is that it is not all graduates will pass this test. They will be just a representative sample in order to get findings which are statistically confident. The list of the sample formed by the center of testing, they have been transferred to higher educational institutions, and students were informed about this test. The students agreed that they will take part in the test and agreed for processing their data in the USA. From this point of view, the correct sample has been formed and all students' rights are protected. Could you tell us, please, whether the test could be passed in English authentically, which could be compared with American students passing the same time, and is it planned to take part in such experiments in future? I'd like to add to previous answer, except representative sample. In our universities, about 100 persons volunteered to take part in this test. They are volunteers. We name them volunteers, and we hope they will also take part in this testing, in this comparative research. This would be of interest for us because we will be able then to find out what is this sample of volunteers. This concerns citizens of Ukraine. In Ukraine, we have 1/3 of graduates from other countries. So about 2/3 of them, they study in English. Among those students, there are some persons willing, especially in Kharkiv National Medical University, there is rather many English-speaking foreign students who are willing to pass this test. They will pass it not on May 12th. We will find out later. It will be computerized and the dates will be set later. Thank you, dear colleagues. Are there any more questions? 2 questions. My small question to our American colleague. Tell us, please, what in the USA happened to those students who fail by the results of tests. According to the tests in the university, they could be doctors, but the test demonstrates that their results are not enough good.
The exam, our national licensing examination, it is necessary to pass in order to be able to practice medicine. A license is not issued by any authority in the United States to a student who has not passed the components of the USMLE. What typically will happen for students who go to medical school in the United States, about 4 or 5% fail on their first attempt. What typically happens is the areas of weakness are identified. The students go back to their university, remediate their deficiencies, and take the examination again. Ultimately, about 99+% of U.S. trained students will pass, but that's after their areas of deficiency have been identified and remediated. So everyone has to pass, but there are multiple attempts and programs of remediation to help those students who need the extra assistance. I might just add one more thing about IFOM to Iryna's response to the question. Just to be clear, the IFOM has been developed by the NBME to be a representation of the common knowledge and skill that would be considered essential for a doctor anywhere in the world. We have a panel of international experts who created the content design, and many of the questions are borrowed from NBME item banks, having been used perhaps in the past in USMLE, but some items are also written by international panels to fill in any gaps in content that are relevant for an international examination compared to a national examination. So the IFOM, different from USMLE, is designed specifically for the common knowledge that would be considered appropriate for a physician, a doctor anywhere in the world, whether in China or Thailand or India or Ukraine or the United States. So it's not exactly the same as USMLE. It's specifically designed for an international comparison across international boundaries.
У мене питання до Олександра Лінчевського.
I have a question to Oleksandr Linchevskyi. Do you plan long-term perspective development of medical education, medical professionals educations? Do you see cooperation with the Ministry of Education and Science and the Cabinet of Ministers in this domain? What assistance do you need? Ukraine is a part of Europe. It will be a member of the EU. It would be the best part of the civilized world. This is the trend for future. This is about what we want to attain. We have no doubts that the ministry and the government will work on our system to become comparative and recognized in the world, so that our students, our doctors, skills, the quality of the education is recognized in the USA and other countries of the world. We are talking about curriculum, about teaching quality, about the cycle of teaching. They should be they should match the world standards. And this is a component in our movement, in our way to European future. Our integration with the European Union, we should have the same exams, the same results of treatment of our patients. To this end, the government and the ministry, we have the same vision. We are moving in this direction. Thank you, dear colleagues. Let's end the briefing at this stage. Thank you. Hope to see you again.
Всем спасибо.